Welcome to Prejim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 57 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about opening a new window using JavaScript method window.open. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 54, 55, and 56 of this video series. In ASP.NET, there are different page navigation techniques as you can see on the slide. We have been discussing about the techniques from 1 to 5 in the previous sessions of this video series. In this session, we'll see how to use window.open method. Let's look at a simple example first. Let's flip to Visual Studio. I have an ASP.NET web application project here with the two web forms. On web form 1, I've got two text box controls where the user can enter their name and email. Now let's drag and drop a button control onto this web form. Let's first add a row to this table. So right click in the TD, insert row below. Now every row in this table has got two TDs, so the new row also has got two TDs, but we just need one TD within the row. So I'm going to delete one of the TDs and I'm going to set the call span attribute of this TD to 2 so that this TD width spans across the width of two TDs. Okay, now let's drag and drop a button control onto this web form. Now in Visual Studio, we have two button controls, the standard ASP.NET server-side button control and the HTML button control. Now which one of those do we use now? Now look at this, we are going to open web form 2 in a new window using the JavaScript method window.open. Now we know that JavaScript runs on the client browser. Okay, so we don't really need the ASP.NET server-side button control for that. It's enough if we use the HTML button. So let me drag and drop the HTML button from the toolbox. So under HTML tab, you can find the HTML button. So let's drag and drop that. So the value here, I'm going to say this as an HTML button, and this is going to use the window.open technique. And let's also set the style width property. So width colon, I'm going to set that to 300 pixels. Okay, so if I flip to the design mode, you can see the text there, the value that appears on the button. Now obviously when I click this button, what should happen? We should open web form 2 in a new window. And how do we do that? Using window.open method. So the simplest way to do that is this HTML button has got an on click event. So on click, I want to open a new window. So I can use the window objects open method for that. So window.open, and to this method we can pass in the name of the web form that we want to open in a new window. In our case, we want to open web form 2.aspx. So I'm going to copy the name of that web form and pass that to this method. That's it, we are done. So let me run this project now. So when I click that HTML button, the JavaScript is going to run on the client browser and open web form 2 in a new window. Okay, so I have two tabs here. On the first tab, we are on web form 1. So web form 2 is now opened in its own tab. Okay, so basically we can use window.open to open a web form in a new window. Now if you look at the syntax of this function, it has got 4 parameters, and all these parameters are optional, including the URL. Now if you look at the example that we have done so far, here the open method is taking in the name of the web form that we want to open, and we said this is optional. So if we delete that, and if I run this now and click on the button, what or which web form is going to be opened in the new window? Let's see what happens when I click this now. When I click this now, look at that, a new window is opened in a new tab, and then it has about :blank. So that's what will happen if you don't specify the web form that you want to open in the new window. So now let's look at the parameters and their purpose. Okay, and to do that, you can actually visit my blog. I have the description there. So on my blog, you can see that URL, this is an optional parameter, the URL of the page to open. If URL is not specified, a new window with about :blank is open, and we have just seen that. And then the name, this parameter is also optional, and this parameter can be used for two purposes. You can use that for specifying the name of the new window, or you can use that parameter to specify the target attribute as well. So now let's actually look at a practical example. Now what we want to do is, if you look at this web form 1, you have two text box controls where the user can enter their name and email, and once they click this button, we want to open web form 2. And if you look at web form 2, this web form 2 has got two label controls. So whatever name and email that we enter on this web form 1, we want to display those on these label controls. And we want to do that using JavaScript. And the easiest way to do that is to write a custom JavaScript function. Okay, so let me go to web form 1 and flip into the source mode, and then scroll all the way up to the head section. In the head section, we can write our custom JavaScript function. So let's use the script tag. Script type is equal to, specify the type as text/JavaScript, and then there we want to write our function. So function, let's call this function as open new window. You can give it any name you want. So open new window. And then the first thing that we want to do is we want to retrieve the name and email that the user types into these text boxes. And we know that name will be in txt name text box and email will be in the txt email text box. So how do I get those a reference to that text box? Using the document object. So the JavaScript document object has got a function called get element by ID. Get the element by ID, and the ID of the text box is txt name. And then once you have the text box control, you have the value property which returns the value within the text box. And let me create a variable called where name is equal to that. And we do the same thing to retrieve the email. So variable email is equal to, and email is present in txt email text box. Okay, so now we can use the window.open method. So window.open. Now look at this. The IntelliSense of Visual Studio shows us the different parameters this method expects. The URL, we have seen the purpose of the URL parameter, and the name. You can use this parameter to specify the name of the window, or you can also use this parameter to specify the value for the target attribute. So I want to open webform2.aspx. So webform2.aspx, and to this web form, I want to pass the values for name and email, whatever the user enters into the text box. And the best way to do that is by using query strings. We haven't spoken about query strings yet in this video series. We will be talking about them in a later video session. But remember that using query strings, you can pass values from one web form to another web form. Now in our case, we want to pass the name and email values from web form 1 to web form 2. So I'm going to use query strings. Question mark indicates the beginning of a query string, and I'm going to call this maybe name of user, or you can just say name whatever you want. So name of user is equal to, so where is name coming from? The name is coming from the name variable here. And similarly, I can pass in the email. So question mark indicates the beginning of the query string, and ampersand indicates I'm going to add another query string. So you can add as many query strings as you want using the ampersand symbol. So I'm going to say email is equal to, and where is email coming from? The email is coming from this variable email. So I'm going to use that variable there. So that's my first parameter. That's the name of the parameter. That's the name of the user, and that's the email. Okay, so the next parameter is the name. We can use that parameter to specify basically the name of the window or the values for the target attribute. So now if you specify the target attribute as blank, then web form 2 will be opened in a new window. That's the default anyway. If you don't specify anything, the web form 2 will be opened in a new window. Or if you specify self, then within the same window web form 2 will be open. We want web form 2 to be opened in a new window, so I'm going to set that to underscore blank. Okay, so that's the second parameter. And third parameter, features, and these are very useful, and using these features parameter you can customize various aspects of the new window. So if I go to this, now you can see here, maybe for example, if you want scroll bars in the new window, you can set scroll bars is equal to S or 1, or otherwise you can use no or zero. Similarly, if you want toolbars, you can specify that. If you want status bar, if you want menu bar, or whether you want to show the address bar or not. So for now, let's say I don't want to show the address bar, so I'm going to set location is equal to no. And then I'm also going to say, resizable is equal to no. I don't want the user to be resizing the window. So I'm going to say resizable is equal to no. And then the final parameter is replace. We'll talk about that parameter in just a bit. So I'm just going to pass true for that. So if you look at that replace parameter, it's a Boolean parameter which accepts true or false. For now, I'm going to pass in true. We'll talk about that just in a bit, because that's applicable only if you're opening in the same window. If you're opening webform 2 in the same window, that's when that parameter is applicable. So we'll talk about that at that point of time. Okay, so that's it. We are done. So now when you run this, okay, let's close these windows. Okay, let me close that window. So I enter the name of the user, Prajim, and maybe email prajim@prajimtech.com. Okay, now look at this. When I click this button, so a new window is opened. Okay, now all we have done so far is we have returned the JavaScript function, but we are not really calling that when we click this button. So on click of that button, we have to call the JavaScript function. So instead of the hard-coded window.open, I'm going to call that function there, and the name of the function is open new window. So let's copy that, and when you specify the function, you also have to specify the opening and closing braces there. Okay, so let's run this now. Obviously, when we click this button now, it's going to invoke that function, and that function will open the new window. Okay, so let's enter the name and email, and then click this button control. So it's going to open a new window. Look at that, a new window is opened, and look at what we have specified in the features. In the features, we have specified we don't want the location is equal to no, means we don't want the address bar, so the user will not be able to change this address bar. And we said resizable is equal to no, so he won't be able to resize this window. So see that there is no that double-sided arrow. We can't resize this window. And look at the URL. The URL webform2.aspx, name of the user, the query string that we passed in, and the name, whatever we entered into the text box, is Prajim, and email is equal to whatever email that we entered there. Now we can actually retrieve those values and display them on the web form. So let's see on web form 2 how to read those query string values. To read the query string values, we can use the request object. So request dot, it has got query string, and I can pass in the name of the query string. And if you remember, the name of the query string is name of the user there. So I'm going to pass that. That's the first query string. And then I'm going to set that as the text for label name. So lbl name.text is equal to that. And along the same lines, we are going to retrieve the email. So the name of the query string there is email, and we are going to display that in email label. That's it. So let's run this now. So now we are passing query string parameters to webform 2. On webform 2, we are harvesting those values and displaying them in the label controls. So let me say Prajim and maybe test as the email. I click this button. Look at that, new window is open. Prajim is the name, test is the email. Okay. Now just to expand on this, now let's set this the name parameter to underscore self. Now when we set that to self underscore self, instead of opening webform 2 in a new window, it's going to open that in the same window. So first let me run this, so when the webform loads. And in the meantime, if you look at the last parameter is replace. It's a Boolean parameter that specifies whether the URL creates a new entry or replaces the current entry in the window's history. So we have this window. Now it doesn't have any history, this webform 1. at the moment. Now let me type in Prajim and then let me type in test. Okay, and click this HTML button. Look at that, it's opened in the same window, and look at this back and forward buttons, they are disabled. Okay, now that's because now the history is not maintained, the window history is not maintained here, and that's because we have set the replace property to true. And if you set the replace property to true, URL replaces the current document in the history list, and that's why you don't have the history here. So web form 1 entry in the browser history, in this window history, is replaced by web form 2. That's why you're not able to move back and forth. But on the other hand, if I set that to false and run this now, it won't replace, the history. So on web form 1, let's type in something and then click that button. Look at that, I can go back now, the button is enabled. I can go back and come back to web form 2. So that's about the replace parameter, the last parameter of the window.open function. Okay, let's set this back to blank. Alright, so we have seen now how to use the HTML button control to open a new window. Can we do that using an ASP.NET server-side button control? Absolutely. So let's copy this tr and paste that so that we get another row, and instead of the HTML button control, I'm going to use the standard ASP.NET button control. So go to the standard tab, drag and drop the button control, and let's call this ASP.NET button. And again, this is going to use the window.open technique, and then let's set that has to be the text, and let's set the ID as button 2. So text of this button is going to be that, and let's set the width is equal to 300 pixels. Okay, so now we have, this is the ASP.NET button. So when I click this, I just want to do the same thing. Now the ASP.NET server-side button control has got on client click property. So on client click, I can specify the same function here. So on client click, open this function. That's it. So now when we run this, whether you click the HTML button or the standard ASP.NET server-side control, you will be able to open web form 2 in a new window. So I type in test and test as the email. I click this button. Look at that, it opens in a new window. Now we have seen how to do that in the HTML source. Can I open a new window using the server-side code? Absolutely. And the way you do that is, okay, let's do that when I click this button. So let me get rid of this on client click attribute. So when I get rid of that, then I can double click this button control. The event handler gets generated, and here we can write the code. So basically, look at this. What do we want to do? We want to open a new window. So all we have to do for that is invoke that JavaScript function window.open. Okay, and to do that from server side, what you have to do is first let's build that string which will have the JavaScript. So I'm going to call this string str JavaScript, and here I'm going to specify the script. Now all we want to do is we want to build a function like this within the code. So we want to build a function like this within this code. So I'm going to say in the code behind, so script. Okay, instead of typing that, I'm going to copy that from here, or we'll just quickly type it. So script, and then here we need to specify window.open. So what do we want to open here? We want to open webform2.aspx, and you can also pass in the query strings. So webform2.aspx, and I want to pass the query strings. So the name of one of the query strings is name of user, so we're going to pass that here. So name of the user, and since this is the server-side code, where is the name of the user coming from? It's coming from txt name text box. So name of the user, and then that's going to come from So let's get rid of that there. So to that we want to append txt name.text. Okay, and then we also want to pass another query string which is nothing but email. And where is email coming from? Email is coming from txt email text box. So basically here we are dynamically building the query string that we want to have executed. I mean the JavaScript basically that we want to execute. So we have webform2.aspx, name of the user, and then the name, email, and then the email from the text box. And then what we need to do basically is close the single quote and close the closing brace of this window.open method, and then finally close the script tag. So we have to build that dynamically. So I'm going to first close the single quote, close the closing brace of the function, and then so that's this closing brace. So once that is done, we need to close, maybe you can put a semicolon if you want, and then close the script tag. That's it. So that's the JavaScript that we want to execute. So now I can use response.write, and then all you do is use this JavaScript. So what happens when the browser encounters this JavaScript? It's going to execute that. Okay, so let's run this now and see what happens. So now if you look at this, in the HTML for that server-side ASP.NET button control, you don't have the on-client click property. So it's going to post back to the server, and within the post back event, it's going to build the script, JavaScript dynamically, and then execute that when it encounters this response.write. So let's run this now. So when the web form loads, we can type in something into these text boxes, test and test. I click this button, so it posts back. Look at that, it is opening a new window. Okay, so I have web form 1 here and web form 2, and we have just seen how to do that using the server-side code. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.